Hello there, it's Tom and Magnolia here, and this is Gunnerkrigg Court, Chapter 74, Moving.
Hi there.
So we start off this chapter with Cat and Path having a bit of a chat, and the two Annies come by.
Were you excited to drop this little drama on people?
Yeah, I guess so. I thought it was an interesting way to start the chapter, because it really gets across everything I needed to get across without spending too long on it, if you know what I mean. I wanted to show that obviously there's something going on between Cat and Path, but not really mention it because that will be brought up again later on in the chapter. And so I thought it was a fun way to start things off.
I always think that, maybe this is just me, but I think that seeing two people in a relationship fight in a story kind of makes me buy into their relationship even more.
Sure, yeah. I did want to show that things are getting a little bit strained between the two of them. But Kat is more than ready to move on and not even acknowledge that anything is going on. And that's kind of a theme with how she deals with things. And again, that's something we'll look into a bit later.
Before we move on from this, do you want to talk about the patch on her shirt real quick?
Oh, that's just the patch for the USS Nostromo. That shirt that Kat's wearing is the same shirt that Lambert wears from the first Alien movie. So Kat successfully manages to move the topic of conversation away from herself and get on to Annie's favourite subject, which is talking about herself. And how much everybody is upset with her, and the situation that the elves are stuck in now since the events of the previous chapter. And since the court is more than willing to help out the tree elves and invite them into the barrier, Annie mentions that they're going to have to decommission some of the robots like they've done in the past, which will allow them to create a hole that the elves can pass through. And this pushes Kat to concocting a plan of hers that, again, we'll see later on.
So the AI that they replaced the robot's brain with, it basically just turns them into tools rather than people with thoughts.
Yeah, pretty much. It's been implied up until now that the brains, basically, that the robots are using are of completely unique design that possibly even the court isn't really aware of how they work. And since the robot bodies are stalled right now, I guess you could say, they just remove their brain and replace them with, something that's more traditionally coded that can follow a set of instructions and commands and essentially turn them into, like something that is less sentient than what they were previously. And that's what Kat really has a problem with here.
I noticed the AI that they replace it with kind of looks like an alien too.
I suppose so. But in the meantime, while Kat is scheming, the Annies have to go and talk face-to-face with the elves. And out of all the elves, the only one who is currently willing to talk to them is Kepi, who we've seen from the side stories, Annie in the Forest.
Were you worried at all about introducing Kepi as if Annie's known her before when you knew that not everyone has read Annie in the Forest?
Well, I tried to keep that in mind. So I wanted it to be clear that the two did know each other, but I didn't go into the specifics of what their relationship was or them kind of reminiscing about stuff that would have happened in the story. And I think that's enough just to show that there probably is some history there, but that history is not particularly important to the current events right now. And the fact of the matter is, anybody who's reading the comic on the website, they just have to click on a single button and they can go to read the side stories that she's part of. And I made it clear in the author text about how they know each other. But even, let's say, if you found this in print form and you had no access to the side stories, I think just the fact that they know each other is enough.
Yeah, and you wouldn't have known that Annie went into the forest and saved the elves.
Exactly, yeah. So I tried to keep that kind of vague, but then also there's a lot more information there for people who do find the side stories.
Well, also, if you haven't read the side stories and this is your first introduction to Kepi, you might interpret her as a lot more antagonistic than she is. And I remember that when these pages were going up, people felt that Kepi was being really, really harsh on Annie and blaming her for things that weren't really her control. Do you feel like that's just because of the rate that the pages go up online? Because I feel that when you read the whole conversation, it's a lot more balanced than just Kepi, ragging on Annie.
I guess that's kind of a side effect of having the tri-weekly update schedule. But the fact is that Kepi is actually kind of stern, and that's more information that you'd pick up from reading the side stories. And not only is she kind of strict and stern, she's also in a really crummy situation, so she is basically chastising Annie. Not because specifically she thinks that everything is her fault, really. It's more that she's kind of chastising Annie for messing with things rather than the outcome of having messed with those things, Obviously, Kepi and the other elves are in a bad situation because I guess Annie was messing with things. And really, you could say that, if Annie hadn't been dealing with the coyote and a sanguine throughout all the years, then possibly this may not have happened. But Kepi also kind of knows that a lot of this is beyond Annie's control, So she is giving her a hard time, but she does understand that, the stuff that Coyote gets up to and the results of that are not really in anybody's control.
Yeah, I think people were kind of sore on Annie's behalf, but I think when you read the whole chapter, the point comes across a little bit differently than that.
Well, I hope so, because, Annie does get a lot of blame for all this. But during the talk, we see that Adira has come along as well, I guess to try and liaise a little bit with the forest people and let them know that the interior of the court isn't some kind of weird death machine. And we see that she's kind of settling into life in the court. She's wearing court clothes now, and when I design her outfits, I like to imagine that she's not really used to, let's say, human-made clothes, like since humans will have a lot more sophisticated like technology for making clothes, so Adira will wear things that she's probably not used to. Like here she's wearing jodhpurs, which you wouldn't really normally wear outside of horse riding, but she's kind of fascinated with the idea of figure hugging clothes because she's just never really come across anything like that before. Because when I draw the forest elves, they tend to wear baggy, like loose fitting clothes.
So here Kepi asks what the court wants in return for helping them, and Smitty admits that they need help moving the ironwood. Would the court still have helped them if they couldn't get anything in return?
Yeah, they would have. Just because there's no reason not to, really. And a lot of the help that has been arranged here would probably have been initiated by Smitty, since he's kind of not in control of that stuff, but he is a point of contact with the interior of the court. But the fact that they do come to Kepi with this request of help, I guess that just makes Kepi think that they're only doing it because they want their help. And the way she puts it is that they're just dragging them into meddling with things that they really shouldn't be meddling with.
It's kind of a bad foot for them to start on.
Yeah, kind of. But Kepi does agree to talk to the rest of the forest elves.
I think people thought that the name Mark for Kepi's husband was kind of funny because it sounds sort of more modern, but it is kind of an old English name, and that's the sort of flavor that the tree elves have, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. I just wanted it to be just a very simple, not fancy name, if you know what I mean. Like, generally elves in media and other stories are seen as very fancy and flamboyant, and they all have strange, weird elf names and all this and that, but for the elves in my story, there's just none of that crap. It's just, his name's Mark, her name's Kepi,
They're kind of salt-of-the-earth elves a little more.
Yeah, pretty much. And so with that, we just have a small transition where we see that the court has opened the barrier and the elves are being led in, and they're being housed in this big building because there's plenty of space for them, really.
So it seemed at the beginning of the comic that something like this, like the elves actually coming to live in the court, would have been unthinkable. And I know they're in a situation where they don't have much choice, but has Annie's attempts to kind of cross those bridges helped this to happen at all?
It has, but also, like a lot of stuff in the comic, there is some other stuff going on, that will be explored later.
Interesting. You could delete
Let's
that.
hope. Let's hope it's interesting. But now that we're done with that, we're back to kind of some of the stuff that we saw at the beginning of the chapter. And as the Annies are walking home, Path decides to confront them with a couple of friends in tow.
I love Annie, and I think Path is being sort of unfair here, but I'm also kind of on Path's side from this just because, she's confronting her and being direct with her emotions and stuff. And I don't know, I think there's something to respect about that.
Well, when this scene was going on, people did think that Path was being extremely unreasonable, especially having her friends with her, because a lot of the time a situation like this would be a setup for a scene with bullying going on, where some guy comes along and brings a couple of his tough guy friends with him or whatever. But here I kind of wanted to imply that the reason why Path had her friends with her is because really Path is kind of intimidated by Annie, a little bit, especially now that there's two of them. And aside from physically Annie's taller and whatever, and she knows that she has these fire powers, she's also intimidated by the fact that Annie is so close with Kat, with her girlfriend, and she did want to basically yell at Annie for being so, blockheaded, that she probably felt that she couldn't have done that on her own.
And I think it's sort of real, like when someone is hurting someone you love and you don't really care to see their side of it because all you care about is that the person you love is hurting, especially when you're young and haven't really learned yet to deal with those things more maturely. She's still figuring that out.
Yeah, and with that immaturity, it does kind of cause Path to step over the line a little bit and start to imply that Annie really shouldn't even be Kat's friend, which is her really making a call beyond her station, I guess. It's not really Path's place to say who can and can't be Kat's friend.
Yeah, but I think the thing about Path saying, or what, you'll burn me, I think that's actually more fair than people give it credit, because Annie does use her fire in a kind of show-offy way that could be seen as threatening.
Yeah, and it does flare up when Annie gets angry, and that's kind of a little bit what's happening here, and so Path does really just shut it down straight away.
Yeah, but she shouldn't be saying that Annie shouldn't be Kat's friend.
No, sure. But she does start literally pointing fingers and saying that the Annie that came back from the forest was basically the catalyst for why everything was going so wrong right now. And then as she's pushing against that line, some old characters come to the rescue, and Zimmy and Gamma make an appearance.
So Zimmy basically just doesn't grow then.
She doesn't seem to have, no.
Yeah.
Gamma is visibly older and taller, but yeah, Zimmy still looks like the little runt that she was when we last saw her, which I guess by now would be Chapter 49, The Torn Sea, which was quite a while ago. And I guess just their presence is enough to diffuse the situation, and Path and her little squadron back away at this point.
Is the blonde one Becky?
It is Becky Ground. But anyway, this gives the girls a bit of a chance to catch up, and Gamma a chance to catch some Z's, I guess, while they're talking. And so they convey the situation to Zimmy, who's pretty amused by everything that's going on.
It seems like Zimmy is in a little bit of a calmer place.
Yeah, she is here. And we kind of see that part of the reason of that is because she reveals that Zimmy and Gamma and also the other kids in their house are basically just kind of abandoned by the court right now, and they're not really interfered with, and they're left to their own devices, which for Zimmy, like, she couldn't have asked for a better situation.
So I guess this is kind of implying something about the court.
No, that's right, it is, and Zimmy says outright that they seem to be building up to something, but quite what that is, she doesn't know or care, so she's just happy that they leave them alone.
I think it's cute that Zimmy's eager to hear about Kat's relationship status.
Yeah, I guess so.
Or is she just saying that to be polite?
No, she has no reason to be polite. So here as they're chatting, they talk about the fact that the two Annies have been split somehow, and that it's really not outside the realm of what Zimmy has seen before in her experiences, and she does bring up something that the Annies have not really considered, which is if they do resolve the situation, that kind of implies that one of them will have to be gone, from this world or the comic or whatever, wherever they exist.
This is an interesting part of the conversation here.
Yeah, the Annie tries to connect that with possibly what it is that Kat is upset about, and this kind of leads into a discussion that we've seen many times throughout the course of the comic. The sort of exploration of the boundaries between science and magic in those terms in the comic. And the fact that Kat, in her relationship with Annie, ends up crossing over that boundary pretty often. And now we get to see Zimmy's point of view on this situation, and Zimmy's view is pretty unique. She has a pretty unique perspective on the world, and she explains a little bit about it here, framing the discussion in terms of what is seen and what is unseen.
It's interesting that Zimmy uses the term seen and unseen because she also knows from personal experience that just because something is seen doesn't mean it's real either, right?
Yeah, and that is kind of the crux of her theory here, I guess, is that, I guess in general terms, it's the argument that is just because something isn't explained, it doesn't make it magic, or something that is sufficiently advanced may seem like magic, that kind of argument. But I wanted it to be a little bit more unique and specific to Zimmy's situation, which in turn is specific to the situation of the comic, because the fact of the matter is they do live in a sort of a scientific institution, but they do come across stuff that could be termed magical. And while they would have the ability to, I guess, study what would be considered magic in a laboratory setting, and which would then take what is magic and bring it into the realm of scientific research. No matter how much they try, or how much somebody like Kat or even Annie's dad in the past have tried, they just cannot bridge that gap, and that sort of obsession and that block in I don't know, like the physics of the universe just kind of leads people like Tony to really go down a bad road, as Zimmy says here.
But it's interesting, too, that Zimmy brings up that Kat's understanding of technology goes so far beyond Annie's ability to understand, but it could be seen the same way.
Yeah, exactly. And so she's just using that as a way to point out that Annie is seeing the same thing that Kat is, but from a different perspective. And while Annie is able to accept that there are things that she doesn't understand in the realm of, I don't know, science and technology, for example, Kat is not able to let that pass, and while in the past she has been able to, with things like meeting Mort or, the Shadow Men, or, hearing about things that happen with Coyote, stuff like that. There's come a point now where it seems like Kat is reaching a sticking point. And to illustrate that, I use a version of this illustration here, which is called the Flammarion engraving. And it's supposed to depict a person of science. Technically, it's an alchemist, but a person of science who, through their research in alchemy and understanding the world, is able to break through the physical barrier of what we see around us and see the inner workings of the universe beyond what we can comprehend. And here it's represented as reaching through the sort of sphere of the real into the sphere of the heavens, and like it's an illustration that I've always kind of really liked, and I like how succinct a metaphor it is. And I think for Kat, it's very apt for the situation that she's in. And so, as Zimmy describes it here, is that Kat is going through this experience where she is breaking through the bounds of what she understands, and it's, as she says, grinding her gears.
I think the comparison of Kat and Tony is a really interesting one too, because with Tony we can see an example of someone who did this and failed pretty spectacularly, and it destroyed him, basically. And so not only does it show what might happen to Kat, which is worrisome, but it also kind of explains why they got along so well once they actually talked to each other.
Yeah, pretty much. And I did want to kind of indicate that, yeah, Tony is somebody who's been destroyed by this pursuit. He's in the pursuit of trying to figure out what happened to his wife and what to do about it. He ended up very nearly harming his daughter, and thankfully because of the interference with Zimmy. I mean, Zimmy knows full well who Annie's dad is because of that experience, but if you remember that whole experience in that chapter, Annie and Kat basically treat it as a dream. They're probably not even sure that stuff really happened. But again, it's something that Zimmy has seen before, and she recognizes this in Kat. In fact, she recognizes it from the second she saw her the first time.
Just a quick thing about Zimmy before we move on from her. It seems that Zimmy now has an understanding of herself. Would that have been possible if she had stayed out of the court and away from Gamma? Because it seems like before she came here, she wouldn't really have the ability to sit down and really think about her nature and stuff.
Well, I think contrary to that, the problem with Zimmy is what she illustrates here is that she pretty much knows her lot. She gets what she is, and she understands, in her view, she understands how the world works, and she understands everything around her. The problem is that she's completely powerless to do anything about it, and all she can do is, laugh or cry about it. And she indicates here that something like Coyote is similar in the sense that he understands how everything works, but he is able to control it,
Right.
But Zimmy, on the other hand, she's just a wretch, that has no control over everything around her, and she understands that, and she's basically resigned to all that. So while being at the court would allow her more instances of being comfortable, especially in situations like this, that's not to say that gives her a broader understanding of her lot in life. It just allows her to maybe get a bit of respite from it,
Well, that's a relief then.
Well, sure, yeah. And I guess that's kind of why she's happier here than we've ever seen her, because the court is leaving her alone. She's in a situation where she has a handle on her situation, and she's able to just kind of sit back and reflect on it,
Sure.
But that is the end of the discussion with these guys. And despite all this, and, basically helping Annie understand Kat a little bit better, Zimmy is still kind of scared of Kat, and she says it here, and she says that you got to keep an eye on what she's up to. And this transitions back to what Kat was up to upon hearing what the court was planning to do with the robots. And we see here that Juliet has brought the stalled CPUs from the robots by the barrier. And part of the plan that Kat is involved in requires her to bring back some of the Golem robots and install a bypass and reactivate them for help, despite the fact that she promised not to do that previously. And I tried to show here that she brought the robots back, but the one robot that we saw from Give and Take all those chapters ago, she's intentionally not bringing him back to life,
So this is a pretty low point for Kat here.
Yeah, kind of. She's directly going against something that she would not have done before, and she knows that she's doing wrong here just because of, the experiences that she had with the robot before. And so that chapter ends with Kat in pretty low situation, and opposed to that, this bonus page is Zimmy and Gamma looking pretty happy.
I remember you said that you wanted to show that someone was happy that there were two Annies instead of seeing it as a problem.
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite of the previous bonus page, which was Kat again subtly mentioning that more Annies means more problems. But here, like Zimmy or Gamma, one of the two of them is saying that Annie's actually not that bad a person, and the other one is agreeing.
Yeah.
So somebody's on her side. And that is that. Come back again for chapter 75. She Gave Us a Notion.
Bye!